My Lords, I rise to, I believe, make this a full cross-health welcome for this bill, a rather rare occurrence, and join others in warmly welcoming the tone of the Minister's speech. The regular repeats in that speech of the campaigners' hashtag polluter pays, the promise to take on board proposed amendments from your Lordship's House. It truly is a breath of fresh air, and I can only congratulate the Minister and the Government. And I note how this shows that campaigning works. After uncountable long hours of effort from affected residents, petitioning, marching, letter writing, social media campaigning, the people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in unsafe, faulty, terrible standard buildings are today being heard in your Lordship's House. I hope they'll get some sense of repayment from that. If only the residents of Grenfell, who before the terrible tragedy tried so hard to get officialdom to listen to their safety concerns, had also been listened to, then 72 people might be alive today. There's a lesson there I hope that ministers will take note of. Experts by experience are indeed experts about their lives and environment and need to be listened to. And as so many speeches thus far have demonstrated, there is much to do in improving this bill, both ensuring that the bill covers all the dangerous buildings that it should, particularly those occupied by vulnerable residents, as the noble lady Baroness Hayman of Alloch highlighted, the crucial issue highlighted by the noble Lord Stunnell and many others of fire doors. What could be absolutely more basic and surely solvable than that? And as many other noble lords have noted, a lot of the focus has been specifically on cladding, but there are so many other issues, and it's crucial that this bill doesn't become overly focused on cladding at the cost of those other issues. And I note, following on from the noble Lord Foster of Bath, he talked about fire suppression systems. I think there's often been an ideological resistance in the UK to sprinklers, but I really think we need to have a rethink on that in many types of buildings. And in terms of the structure of a bill, the idea that house builders will just hand over their ill-gotten gains to cover the damages at the government's request is surely a fantasy. This bill needs to demand, on the face of the bill, make sure there will be full, complete recompense. But rather than running down the already well-travelled list of ways in which this bill needs to be improved, I'm going to briefly take a broader view. And I can't help feeling that actually the Bill Office was possibly demonstrating better quality of engineering than many buildings do in putting me immediately after the noble Lord Foster, given that the points that he made about building safety more broadly, cold homes, and indeed I'd add homes that overheat in the increasing number of heat waves we're going to experience further in the climate emergency, is a risk to life and should be covered in this bill. We have the poorest quality housing in Western Europe, drafty, poorly insulated, expensively relying on gas for heating and cooking, which has, as we increasingly understand, significant health impacts as well. Now, I foresee perhaps long joint conversations with the Bill Office about scope, but a home that kills its vulnerable resident with excessive heat or sickens and kills them through biting cold is deadly too. That has to be a building safety issue. And this, of course, is one that the government seems astonishingly reluctant to tackle after its Green Homes grant fiasco. I note that the big announcement today on levelling up failed to address this issue, astonishingly, given how much of a factor it is in the terrible quality of life and the poverty of so many of the areas of this country that scheme is supposed to address. Coming to another point, the bill also needs to at least start to address the enormous systems disaster that is the building sector. I have no doubt at all that this morning, inadequately trained workers were putting the finishing touches on buildings that were dangerous, that will be moved into by unsuspecting residents, or possibly suspecting residents who still have no choice in the matter. I think that the CEOs of our mass house builders should be forced to have the noble Lord Best's speech embedded on their phones, playing morning and night to show them what society thinks of them and the companies. They have operated for the profit of the few at the cost of the rest of us, as so much of our society, and that financialisation has to be challenged and treated as morally unacceptable and made legally impossible. However, I acknowledge that this is something we can't fix just with this bill, however much your Lordship's House improves it, and I'm sure we will improve it massively. And I think it's really interesting to take a bit of a global perspective and see where there are other parts of the world with similar building safety crises to that in the UK. In the US, in Florida, there was the dramatic, awful, deadly Champlain Towers south collapse, which was recently explored in depth by the New York Times. It demonstrated that in the building boom there in the 1980s, regulatory corners were not cut but rather bulldozed through. And now there's a legacy of incredibly dangerous buildings in an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment. In Australia, the University of New South Wales City Futures Research Centre looked at 635 apartment buildings in Sydney. The report, it's titled Cracks in the Compact City, if you want to look it up, found that 42% of blocks had water problems, 26% had cracking problems, and 17% had fire safety issues. One building built just 6 years ago was in danger of immediate collapse. What ties together these countries? Neoliberal politics and a particular ideology attached to it. The idea that cutting red tape is a way to set societies on a better way forward. I think it's important to highlight that today because we see, as we're here today in your Lordship's House, the government embracing the need for regulation, forced by tragic circumstances and dedicated campaigning. It is accepting the need for so-called red tape, which are actually the rules that keep us and the environment safe. At the same time, we have from Number 10 a press release. It tells us that the Brexit Freedoms Bill will be brought forward to end the special status of EU law. It tells us there will be a major cross-government drive to cut £1 billion of red tape for businesses. Applying that approach, my lords, is what forces us to be here today, trying to rebuild essential systems of regulation slashed away in an orgy of deregulation. We can do much today to force the repair of walls, the replacement of fire doors, the renovation of dangerous balconies. Changing our economic and government system is a much bigger task that this bill demonstrates is urgently needed.
My Lords, I too welcome the bill, and I would say to the